The net neutrality debate has been opened once again after Comcast's recent announcement about its Xfinity service for Microsoft's Xbox. Last month, the cable giant said its soon-to-be-released video streaming service would not count against the monthly data cap for users. And while the information came as good news to consumers, some media activists believe the move threatens the open internet. Public advocacy groups, including Public Knowledge and Free Press, think that Comcast would have an unfair advantage over competition. Larry Downs, however, believes that net neutrality is not at risk and that these claims are unwarranted. He's a senior adjunct fellow at Tech Freedom and is joining us now by way of phone to talk about his perspective. Thanks for being with us today, Larry.
My pleasure.
Great. Well, for starters, and just to help us get a better understanding of this entire situation, can you explain to us exactly what Comcast is trying to do?
Sure. The new service they announced essentially allows your Xbox, if you have an Xbox and you're an existing Comcast Internet and Comcast cable customer, you can now use your Xbox as a set-top box. Mm-hmm. Right now, as you may know, many cable customers have to lease set-top boxes for each television that they've got. This is what's now required after the switch to digital cable. Mm-hmm. And what we can now do is for some of the programming, you can use the Xbox instead of a set-top box, which for many consumers would save them that extra monthly cost. Now, it only applies right now to the on-demand programming from Comcast, so you can't actually yet use the Xbox for all the channels, just the on-demand channel.
But this service is a little bit similar to Verizon's Fios and AT&T's UVerse, though, right?
Yes, of course. All the cable providers, or what the FCC calls multi-video programming distributors, they all have an on-demand service. They've had it for some time, which allows you to either get certain programs when you want to watch them. Some of them are free, or some of them you have to pay extra for.
Okay. Well, as I said earlier, several media interest groups have spoken out against the move, claiming that it could harm net neutrality. But why do you believe that these claims are overblown?
Well, I think there's two main reasons. I mean, one is a legal reason and one is a technical reason. The legal reason is that under the FCC's open internet order of late 2010, that's the net neutrality rules, all cable programming is exempt from any of the rules themselves. And there's a very important reason for that. All cable programming, that is to say all the television that you get from your cable provider, is, of course, highly regulated by not only the FCC, but at the state and local level as well, under a variety of different regulatory systems, some of it having to do with content, some of it having to do with pricing, some of it having to do with the infrastructure itself. And so since those services are already highly regulated, the FCC decided, when it passed its open internet rules, to exempt from them any programming that happens to come down the cable that isn't actually internet content. And you can see why this is important. If you look at how the competing services, if you will, things like Hulu and Netflix and even YouTube, these so-called over-the-top video services, they don't operate in a regulated environment. They don't have to deal with retransmission consent and must-carry rules and local franchise taxes and all the other things that the cable providers do. And in fact, one of the reasons why these over-the-top services have become so popular, and don't forget Comcast is the largest single shareholder in Hulu thanks to its acquisition of NBC Universal, the reason these services are so popular is because, one reason is they're not subject to this very significant regulatory overhang that the cable services are. So just from a strictly legal sense, the open internet rules explicitly exempt any cable television programming from the rules. So no matter what Comcast is doing here, it's not going to violate the letter of the net neutrality rules. Now, as far as the spirit of the rules, I also don't think there's a problem here. This content, of course, is not internet content. It's television content. It doesn't travel over the internet. It does use the same last mile, the cable that goes from Comcast's head end down to your house. That's the same last mile, of course, that your internet traffic uses if you're an internet subscriber, including over-the-top services. But from a technical standpoint, it's very different in terms of how that data stream is handled, how it's compressed. Comcast, obviously, like all cable providers, puts a lot of effort into making sure that the television programming coming down, whether it's on demand or otherwise, whether it's going to a regular set-top box or now to an Xbox, make sure that that programming is compressed and in a file format. By the way, it's not an internet protocol. It uses DOCSIS. That format is optimized to get the best picture quality. There's no similar incentive, of course, for people like Netflix and Hulu and YouTube. They just use Internet protocol. They send those packets as they do, and frankly, from a relative standpoint of technology, the packets that come the same, it might be the same programming, and maybe the same television shows coming, but the programming that's coming over the top is going to be much more inefficient in terms of its use of the last mile than the programming that's coming from Comcast. So just from that standpoint, I don't think there's really any question here about net neutrality or the open Internet. There may be other issues we can talk about, but from a legal and technical standpoint, these are just apples and oranges.
So in your opinion, the FCC order essentially doesn't cover this at all?
Yeah, and I don't think there's any real dispute about that. I think those who are claiming this is a net neutrality violation are saying, but it's not necessarily a technical violation of the rules, but they're more concerned that it's kind of a violation of the spirit of net neutrality. But I don't think there's really a plausible argument that the actual rules themselves cover what Comcast is doing.
All right. Well, in a piece that you wrote on CNET, you said that if Comcast service unfairly discriminates against over-the-top services, then all cable TV wrongly competes with Internet video. So can you explain this further for us?
Sure. As I say, what we're talking about here is a subset of Comcast cable TV content, that is to say, the on-demand part of its cable TV service. So this is movies and television shows that you can watch on demand. And that is cable TV programming just as if you were watching live programming on any one of the hundreds of channels you might receive. If we were to say, just the fact that it's going through the Xbox instead of a set-top box makes this Internet content, makes this somehow something that's subject to competition with the over-the-top services, well, then all the cable programming would have that same characteristic, because after all, I think what the advocates are saying, I don't want to put words in their mouth, is, but what they seem to be saying is, well, because you can watch the same movies and television shows through over-the-top services like Netflix and Hulu and YouTube that you can from the Comcast On Demand or even from Comcast regular cable, since the content is the same, if you treat it differently, in this case in terms of your excessive use charges, if you treat it differently, then you're violating the open Internet. But if that's true, then it doesn't matter whether we're talking about on-demand through the Xbox or regular cable through the set-top box. It is the same programming in many cases, and if you're going to have to treat it all the same, then all cable television is going to have to be, considered under the rubric of the open Internet rules, and that's just not what the FCC had in mind.
Well, media activists are also making a similar argument against AT&T's plan to charge the developers of data-intensive apps this year. So in your opinion, does this move pose a concern, or is it invalid as well?
Well, again, as far as the letter of the open Internet rules is concerned, there's no violation here. The rules for mobile operators were different than the ones for wireline operators, and under the rules, anything that the carriers did that has to do with app stores and curated apps is explicitly excluded from the open Internet rules. So again, as far as the letter of the open Internet rules at the end of 2010 is concerned, there's no potential violation here from the FCC standpoint.
So do you think anything will come of these concerns?
Well, frankly, this is one of these situations, and we saw this all throughout the net neutrality debate, especially in the last year that it was going on while the FCC was considering its formal rulemaking. One of the things that you see to happen is that these advocates believe, sort of any new service that it's not really clear from a competitive standpoint how it's going to play out, they kind of like to just paste it with the phrase net neutrality rather than kind of getting into the nuts and bolts, or rather than actually letting the market work for a while and see if in fact there is any anti-competitive problem. That's a very easy way out of having an actual discussion about who's regulated by whom and who's really disadvantaged by what set of rules and regulations. But I think it's extremely misleading and very unhelpful to trying to figure out, what is best for consumers if we just kind of paste everything with net neutrality. In the case of the Comcast Xbox situation, again, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but my sense is that the real concern of the advocacy groups isn't net neutrality, it's the existence of these bandwidth caps, or what Comcast calls an excessive use fee. Mm-hmm. Right now, I think Comcast Internet users, that is to say Internet users, not cable TV subscribers, but as far as your Internet use is concerned, Comcast has set a limit of 250 gigabytes per month of downloading Internet content through your Internet connection. Beyond that, they reserve the right to charge you excess. I'm not sure that they're actually doing it yet, but I think they are letting some of their subscribers know that they're going over that amount and that they could potentially be charged extra or throttled back or otherwise restricted from that much use. The advocacy groups seem to be concerned that these caps are themselves kind of some kind of a net neutrality violation. They don't like them. They want them to go away. Of course, I'm sympathetic to that. We would all like, unlimited use of everything. Right. But the reality is, of course, that the cable infrastructure can only do what the cable infrastructure can do. And I think it's probably not as big a concern for people who have fiber optic connections. But if you're using the existing, cable infrastructure, that was not built, of course, initially to be a two-way channel. It wasn't built for Internet. It wasn't built for digital programming as well. Cable companies have invested billions of dollars in upgrading the infrastructure to handle these new services. I think they've done a pretty good job, but obviously there's more to be done. And in the interim, there's just so much capacity. And again, if you're using relatively inefficient things like Netflix and Hulu that are using IP protocols to get your video content, it is possible that, of course, you and your neighbors together will saturate the existing cable and nobody will get good service. And in that sense, I think it's understandable that these caps have to be in place while we figure out how to both make the over-the-top services more efficient users of bandwidth, and as the cable companies at the same time continue to upgrade both their software and their hardware and the actual infrastructure to handle more and more traffic, because that's, of course, we all want more. That's a great thing about the Internet revolution is more information all the time. I'm all for that, and as soon as it's possible to have it, of course, we would like to get as much as possible down. And frankly, the providers want that too, because, of course, the more things that you use, the more information that you take on that pipe, the more valuable those services become to you, and the more likely they are to hold on to you as a subscriber.
Right. Well, this is definitely an ongoing topic, and we will be in touch with you for more information about this, Larry. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Anytime. Thank you.
Great. Keep watching WebProNews for the very latest on this news. I'm Abby Johnson with this report.